Hello, thank you for your interest in our presentation, Grading and Assessments, Correlation of Variables Across Schools in One University. We are Dr. Joyce Ellis and Professor Thomas Francel from National University in La Jolla, California. Slide 2. Our introduction. We have a statement of the challenge. Professor ratings versus student learning. Is there a correlation? This is what we first address and last address after the study is completed. A prior study that we conducted indicated that there was no correlation at a major nonprofit university school of business. This study has statistics from that same university, but it also includes 5 different schools. We take the grade point average from each session or class and compare it with student evaluations of teaching, known as SET, from statistics provided through distributed end-of-courses surveys. What we study, we use an SPSS linear regression method. Statistics from all 5 university schools are examined: the School of Education, School of Professional Studies, School of Engineering and Computing, and College of Letters and Science. The correlation of the GPA and the assessment scoring questions, grade rating relationship, is the eventual outcome statistics that we are desiring. First question we have: do students rate our professors higher, expecting higher grades? Slide 4, our hypotheses. In addressing the relationship between the GPAs and the SETs, we question if there's statistical significance between the dependent variable, the professor assessment scores, and the independent variable, which is the student GPA. As a result, we have a null hypothesis that's tested and stated here. Our null is there is no correlation between the student GPAs and their assigned assessment scores for their professor. I'll qualify this: no or very little.
This study compares average grade point averages, GPA, with student evaluations of teaching, SET, from statistics provided through end-of-course surveys distributed by the university's Office of Institutional Research. These statistics are correlated using the SPSS linear regression method. Statistics from 6 university schools are examined, including the School of Education, School of Professional Studies, School of Engineering and Computing, School of Business and Management, the School of Health and Human Services, and the College of Letters and Science. Our study research question addressed the possible relationship between a student's grade and their evaluation of their instructor. Since in many situations both the GPA and the assessment are used to evaluate a professor, we question a statistical significance between the 2 variables used in this study. We chose a dependent variable, the student's assessment of their professor, and a student GPA score as the independent variable. This GPA score is commonly used to rate the rigor of the course applied by the professor. As a result of this research question, our null hypothesis is there is no correlation between the student GPA and their assigned assessment scores for their professor.
Slide 5. Here we address the overall literature review. Now, I picked the most prominent ones found that address an overview of schools within a university. Also the basic questions of the correlations. When we started this out, this second study of ours, we wanted to look at support of different variables. In this case, Griffin et al. Concludes their findings contribute to the argument that correlations between the GPAs and SETs should be looked on with suspicion at all levels. A host of entangling and potentially inexplicable factors seem to be at work behind the more granular correlation values. Now, this is what we had said about futuristic studies in our first study. Suspicion at all levels, yes, about the statistical input on assessment about the professor and also the student GPAs. Marks and Mueller is important, and this is a 2012 study, because they found that schools are transforming the rules of the academic game. Such changes enable students to reflectively select and inflate their GPAs, thereby rendering effective comparison problematic. It's of significance to administrators and governing accrediting bodies, also employers and graduate professional school recruiters. What we're talking about here is an academic game, so to speak. Let's say a school picks for the graduate level that their GPA should be, let's say, 3.25. What's it based on? We have to have another variable looking at what is their desire based on? Rigor? What if you have a higher one? Does that mean the professor is better? Or what if lower? I mean, there have been statements like you better have an assessment of 4.0 or you won't be teaching here again. Well, then what do you think happens with those two possible correlations? Now, in the third bullet point, we also want to note that 75% of the professors in all 6 schools are adjuncts. Soner in 2000 referred to this, who states adjuncts hired on a term-by-term basis are easily replaced. That's true. Most face serious pressure to earn good evaluations from their students, so they want to keep the students happy. So wouldn't that be possibly biased? And the last bullet point in this page, the study researched the GPAs and SETs of 5 schools, and we've got their programs within the schools. And they all have different program learning outcomes. That's another important fact of looking at things with suspicion, because what do those GPAs reflect? Now, Grayson in 2004 also stated, high grades do not necessarily translate into good positive evaluations of teaching, nor does being exposed to good teaching necessarily result in good grades. By contrast, good teaching and high grades does not lead to increased program satisfaction. So now we have course learning outcomes, we have program satisfaction, and now we're looking at 5 different schools within one university and see if anything correlates.
Student assessments are collected by the university's Office of Institutional Research just prior to the end of each class. A web-based form is used for both on-site and online classes. The assessments are tallied by OIR and are not shared with the instructor until after the grades for the class have been recorded. We accessed this assessment data for all 6 schools, covering 3 recent calendar years. The original sample contained data for almost 23,000 classes and 382,000 students. Data from pass-fail classes were eliminated from the study as they did not have an ordinary ABC grade. Some classes had no assessment forms returned for one reason or another, and those classes were eliminated from the study. The final sample totaled over 22,000 classes with 352,000 students. The size of the study offers sufficient validity and freedom from individual instructor or student influence. The university's grading system is typical for higher education. A grade of A is assigned 4 points, a B grade 3 points, etc. A B plus would be assigned a numeric grade of 3.3. Student grade expectations are not collected by OIR, but most students track their grades throughout the course and therefore have a very good understanding of what their final grade for the course would probably be. A weighted average was calculated by multiplying the GPA for each class by the number of enrolled students in that class. Teaching assessments utilize 12 criteria, and each one is assigned a score of 1 through 5. The criteria include evaluations such as: was the instruction well organized? Did the instructor give clear explanations? Did the instructor provide timely feedback? And overall, was the instructor an effective teacher? The student's evaluation score was then averaged for each input form. OIR further averaged all input forms collected for the class. This results in a teacher assessment of 1 through 5 for the class. A weighted average was calculated by multiplying that score by the number of assessment forms returned. In order to determine the correlation between student grades and teacher assessments, we utilize a linear regression, selecting the grade as the independent variable x and the assessment score as a dependent variable y. It was expected that the linear model would be able to predict a teacher's assessment score based upon the class GPA. The formula y equals c plus rx, where c is a constant or y-axis intersect and r is the correlation coefficient, was used. Given this model, we would expect that a student grade of A would result in their assigning a certain assessment score, while the student receiving a grade of C would record a different score. Further, we calculated the r-squared value for the model. The value is the proportion of the variance in one variable is explained by the other variable. The value close to 1.0 or 100% indicates a very excellent correlation between the independent and dependent variables was found. Applying this regression model to the School of Business and Management dataset, we found a correlation coefficient of 0.019 with an r-squared of 0.0. This is interpreted to mean that there is no correlation between the independent and dependent variables. The y-axis intercept of 4.32 was very close to the weighted average from the data set of 4.39. One might conclude from this result that the instructor would receive a score of between 4.3 and 4.4 regardless of the grades assigned. Analyzing the data from the other 5 schools produced similar results. The null hypothesis is supported. All 6 schools produced a near zero coefficient correlation, indicating no statistical significance. The student's expected grade had no influence on his or her evaluation of the instructor's teaching assessment. Interpretation is that students expecting an A grade often gave below average assessments. Conversely, students expecting a C grade often gave above average assessments. In addition, in supporting the null hypothesis, conclusion can also be drawn that the professor ratings and student scores do not reflect the assumed rigor applied to each course. This study contributes to existing literature and supports the 2009 studies stating that a potential myth of correlation between student GPAs and professor assessments exists.
In addressing further study, there's a few important comments rather than in prior studies. One is the ranking of the student. Is it a first year, fourth year in undergrad? Obviously, the same with graduate, beginning their graduate program, ending their graduate program, because obviously they have more experience with the professors than they did when they walked into the program. So that would be another variable for consideration. Again, is our on-site online classes. All right, we're talking about adjuncts primarily, but a few full-times are online. But that would be something to segregate as another variable. And then, what about the biases? A lot of former researcher has stated the biases are important. Not only of student ratings of professor, but the rigor required by the university departments, university schools. Why? Is that a bias that if you don't have a particular GPA, then what does this mean in the scope of the correlation? And one other thing of importance here that I want to mention is we have not included any adjustment for the response rate per survey. And when looking at it, let me just suggest a power of thought here. If you've got 25, 30 students and they're ranking their professor, what if you only have 5 respond? What do you do for the lack of the other responses? Because these surveys that go across this university, it's like numerically calculated scaling of 1 to 5 in different areas. But then they have student comments. How much are the student comments worth? Because out of 25, you could get 5 that comment. Others don't care. This is sent out the second to last week of the course, and why aren't we getting that response? What is the correlation and what is the variable relationship for this lack of response? This is just a few in a further study that I made mention of. And then I'll turn the final comments over to Professor Francel.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. I just wanted to add that the results of our analysis are not exactly what most people expect. Most of our colleagues believe that student ratings can be bought with higher grades, and that's not what we found. Now, my question is our university that unique, or is this something that other extensive studies can investigate at other universities and other parts of the country? And so we invite collaboration on this kind of study, and if you're interested in participating, please give us a call or write, and let's talk about how we can expand this to other universities, other parts of the country. Thanks again for attending, and we look forward to hearing from you.